Today we're talking about another one of the big debates in reefing, a topic that has a number of considerations, which is bare bottom or a sand bottom setup. And really, what are the considerations that are right for you, whether you've been doing this for a while and you're spinning up something new, or you're just getting into this hobby and you're thinking, how do I want to set this up? We're going to talk about those considerations today, but before we do, let's talk about who we are. Jay.
Yep, so my name's Jason. I've been with BRS going on about 11 years now. Been in the hobby for 15. You might recognize me from the Master Lighting video series I did with Ryan, or Black Friday Lives, which I'm most notable for.
Because you gave everybody out there a lot of free stuff.
Indeed.
Well done.
Indeed. And to my right,
I'm William. I'm the tank tech here at BRStv. I take care of all the tanks here in the studio and throughout the office. Like this guy here behind us is the 900. I've been doing it for a really long time. I've been doing this professionally for about a decade now, and I'm happy to be here.
And I gotta be honest, I don't know how you do it, to be like by yourself. This place is filled with some pretty beautiful saltwater tanks, and not small ones either. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of gallons, expensive fish, challenging setups, and you're the guy that makes them all work. It's pretty impressive.
I'll say they're looking pretty good right now, actually. I'm pretty happy with them.
Okay, so modesty's solid there.
Oh yeah,
Well
absolutely.
Done. No, I mean, listen, you got to be confident when you're doing what you're doing around here, and it looks awesome. And my name's Jesse. I do the content on the BRS Fresh side, so maybe you've checked out some of the videos on that side of our business. But I'm on that channel, and I'm really excited to be hanging out with these guys because what I'm doing is starting my journey into saltwater. So I've had the opportunity to learn a ton already, but I can't wait to learn so much more from you guys and start that journey and start a series where we're gonna actually follow along with that journey of building out and setting up my first saltwater tank, because I don't know how I don't get into it when I'm hanging out with you guys all the time. So I'm excited about that, and topics like today, topics like ATS versus Fuge that we talked about on the last episode, these are the considerations that I have wanting to set up a new system, and that's why we're talking about them. So let's get into it. All right, sand bed and bare bottom will help us understand what are the definitions here of these two setups.
Right, so bare bottom, really basic. It's a bare bottom. There's no substrate in the bottom. So basically it's your normal tank, rocks, coral, fish, everything is all the same, just no substrate, no sand, no gravel, no rocks. And a sand bed tank is the opposite. Put some sand in the bottom, either sand, gravel, I've seen rock rubble, anything like that is gonna be considered a substrate.
Probably considered a more traditional route in all things reefing, right?
Absolutely.
But there's pros and cons to all of this stuff. So let's talk about the pros of a bare bottom tank. Like, why would somebody want to make that choice?
yeah, absolutely. So we'll start off with the biggest red flag here, right, is it doesn't look natural. So that's what we're probably gonna say that a lot. But I'm gonna try to make a case for bare bottom tanks. So nutrient export, a lot easier. You need less of a cleanup crew. Higher flow corals, higher domain corals like SPS, which is my typical tank preference. Requires higher flow, and you don't have to worry about your sand getting blown over, or maybe choosing a larger grain of sand. So there's a lot of benefits, in my opinion, to just skipping the sand altogether. One of the drawbacks being the cycle is longer, so let's just get that out in front. Know ahead of time your cycle is going to be substantially longer than if you were to add sand, but long-term health-wise, I'm all for bare bottom tanks.
Okay, so my understanding obviously is that sand can also function as a place for natural biodiversity, right? You're going to have everything from cleanup crew that's going to live in there, but you can also have beneficial bacteria in there. So aren't you kind of losing all of those benefits? I mean, Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say you're definitely losing some of them. A majority of your beneficial bacteria is definitely gonna be on your rocks. So that's the main source of them. Now your sand will have different types. You can definitely have some more readily available anaerobic bacteria that are gonna settle down into the very bottom of your sand bed. Those can be really good at helping denitrification. That being said, they can also cause issues. So those big anaerobic bacteria populations, if they get disturbed, they're gonna cause some issues. So overall, I would say there are definitely pros and cons. I'm a big sand fan. I just think it looks better. I think it holds an area for your pods, for your bacteria to grow. And I just think it's a really great, more natural approach to reef keeping.
Great point. So that is a big one. You lose out on the anaerobic zone, not having the sand bed. Now, I do want to reference the last video we talked about, specifically refugiums. You can offset this by having sand in your refugium, having a refugium, and then having sand in said refugium.
Yeah, so even if I ever chose to go for a bare bottom, I would absolutely put sand in my refugium. Either sand, a miracle mud, even rock rubble would work great. It's just a place for those bacteria that maybe wouldn't be able to populate your display tank with a bare
Totally agree
bottom.
with that.
So if you go with sand in the refugium, then like we talked about in the last video, you're maybe then considering a different macroalgae other than the chaeto from a spinning standpoint. So as you make that decision, it then is going to lead to other considerations.
Absolutely.
As well. Now, some of the things that I have here in front of me are community questions that you guys have asked us at Ask BRS or in video comments or to customer service. So we've got a list of those questions. We want to make sure we're addressing some of those here on this topic. One of them is, does a bare bottom tank help reduce nutrient buildup better than a sand bed? So we started kind of talking about this, but one of the benefits I think here is you don't have you maybe lose out on some of the cleanup crew and the bacteria that you want in that sand bed. However, you're then not getting some of the nutrient issues that a sand bed can cause. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, so we touched on it super briefly, but to expand on it, and again, especially for high flow tanks, you don't have the sand bed catching fish waste or excess food. Okay. Those are gonna get picked up, maybe small section of the rock work, but you're taking the entire size of your tank and reducing that down to where the rock touches the glass, and you can offset that with flow.
Gotcha. Okay. So another question that the community had here is, does a bare bottom tank require more frequent cleaning or maintenance?
So I'd make the argument that it actually reduces it, right? So for the long-term health of your system, if you have sand, you're likely going to have some cleanup crew to stir the sand, or you're going to siphon the sand. So if anything, I think it's less maintenance than your traditional style tank with sand.
I think I'd agree with that. I would say the bare bottom is going to be a little bit less maintenance as long as it's set up properly. That's the caveat I will say. You're going to need the right kind and the right amount of flow to make sure that the detritus gets kicked up and goes into your filtration system. If you're not, a sand bed can be a little bit more forgiving in that instance.
Because you're just not seeing it? I mean, is that basically the benefit? Because to me, as I'm making this consideration, I'm thinking to myself, okay, bare bottom glass tank, do I really want to look at all of that stuff that right. Oftentimes blends in with a sand bottom? Is there a way to control that and minimize that? Is it just flow?
It's gonna be flow.
Okay.
Yeah, on a bare bottom, it's gonna be flow. You're gonna have to kick it up so it gets into your filtration, whether that be hang on back, all in one, or a sump, something like that. It's going to need to get to that somehow. The benefit to the sand bed is, it'll settle onto it, it blends in, but then also the sand bed will utilize it. It'll use those nutrients and turn it into either nitrogen gas or go through the whole cycle to relieve those nutrients from the system.
Okay, so a question that I need to ask is just the logistics around setting up a bare bottom tank. How exactly does that work? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you're gonna lay in the sand, you're gonna use that to hold the rock structure. That's all part of the build process. Now you've taken that out. I mean, are you just gluing to the glass?
Yeah, so this is a really good point, and actually brings up an error that I want to mention, is that you don't necessarily want to build your rock work from your sand bed. You want to build it from the tank and then lay your sand out around it, because you don't want that shifting. But yeah, definitely don't rely on your sand to hold your aquascape.
Yeah, something you can do as well if you wanted to run a bare bottom is you can put some ABS or sheets of plastic down, some like 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch thick sheets. And that way when you put your rock on it, you're not gonna chip or crack the glass down at the bottom. And in my opinion, it looks pretty good. And the ABS sheets are gonna be able to adhere coral to them really quickly. And so any coral that you want encrusting on the bottom is gonna grow really fast.
Great point. It's a rough surface, so you're also gonna get coralline algae a lot quicker.
Yes.
So that was actually a question I had. Is the idea of a bare bottom tank to avoid coral anywhere but the rock structure? Or stylistically, do some people go with a bare bottom look, but also try to grow corals like in and around? Like what types of corals would those be? Is that a common way to set this up? Like, what does that look like?
Right, that would be really the only time I'm gonna set up a bare bottom is if I want some encrusters covering the bottom of the glass.
Okay.
It is a cool, unique look to a tank. You can have things like green star polyps, which are gonna go and encrust over the entire bottom and look like a little grass. Things like favias, there's tons of things that will encrust over the bottom of the tank, which can give a really unique look to your tank. Now that being said, I'm pretty partial to things that will do better in sand. So like plate corals will do really good in sand, tongue corals, other things like that. And I'm also very partial to clams, which some clams need sand. So those kind of things, it's just gonna depend on what you wanna get out of your system.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So be prepared to try to offset that non-natural look with additional corals.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, obviously I know a lot of people out there, when you're taking a look at your setup and thinking about what that's gonna look like, you're thinking about the livestock, right? You're thinking about what kind of fish do I wanna keep? There's gotta be considerations here between bare bottom and sand when it comes to livestock, right? There's going to be some fish that possibly you just can't set up with a bare bottom tank, or that you can't keep with a bare bottom tank. Is that,
yeah, things like
fair?
wrasses, things like gobies, some things absolutely require sand. Jawfish is a great example of something that's gonna need sand to be able to build its burrow and feel safe. So if they don't have those kind of things, they will stress out and they could get diseases and they could perish because of it. So you definitely wanna be able to provide these animals exactly the habitat that they need to not be stressed. Things like leopard wrasses, they're gonna go and bury themselves under the sand in order to go to sleep. And if you don't provide them that sand, they will stress out at night.
Jason, let me ask you this. What happens if I change my mind, right? We're talking about this in the context of, well, you're gonna make a final decision and then you're stuck with it. But what happens if, example on the freshwater side, I have a 75-gallon tank over there that was set up completely differently with a sand bottom, different rocks, woods, etc. And one day I changed my mind. And I took all of that out and I laid aqua soil in there and different rock structures and different plants and the whole thing. What does that look like here? Like, let's say I'm setting up a bare bottom tank and I go, you know what, I want to add sand, or vice versa.
Yeah, so I've got great news for you and you, the viewers. We already made the mistake for you.
There you go.
We do not recommend removing a sand bed. We did it here. What resulted was a massive bacterial bloom, followed by an algae bloom. Now we did recover a lot of the coral that were in the tank, but there was instant browning. It just wasn't a good experience. What we're discussing today, I would recommend for new setups. Don't try to change it. Don't try to remove sand. Don't try to add sand. I wouldn't do it at all.
Okay, so we've been down that road.
Yeah.
So for you, it's consider the pros, the cons of each of these setups, make a decision, and stick with it.
For your new tank.
For your new
Not
tank.
your current tank.
Right.
Yep.
No adding in out of nowhere.
But I will say, I am a big fan of sand. If I set up a bare bottom tank, I would probably end up putting sand in it. If you really have to put the sand in, as slow as possible, weeks or even months to add the sand. Just go like a scoop at a time. It should be just fine. You can add basically anything to your tank if you add it slow enough.
Can you essentially cycle your sand before you put it in? I mean, would that be a tactic where you would like have it separate over here, saltwater, heated, flow, the whole thing, and try to cycle some, little organisms in there, bacteria, et cetera, and then you're going to add it to your tank and it's technically ready, even if you use, let's say, the same tank water, the same temperature? Would that be a hack, if you will, to get this done?
I would not do that,
okay.
Mainly because your sand is gonna develop in layers. So you're gonna have, like we were talking about, the anaerobic layer at the bottom. If you let your sand cycle, you will create those layers of different types of bacteria. And then when you go to scoop them up into your tank, you're mixing them all up. The ones that need to be on the bottom of your sand bed are now gonna be on the top and they won't survive up there. So you definitely wanna put the sand in at the start, or if you absolutely have to add sand to your tank, go as slow as possible. Same thing with removing it. I don't really recommend removing it ever, but if you absolutely have to, the slowest method you can possibly do is gonna be the only one that even has a chance of working for you.
Got it. Okay, so now let's get into a little bit of a rapid fire question and answer section. So again, these are questions coming straight from you guys asking us on this topic. And let's just start with the first one. Tank size. Will, go.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
I would say doesn't matter at all. I've seen tiny little tanks with bare bottom. I've put 4, 5, 6 inches of sand bed in the 20-gallon cube just to see what happens. You can do it, all of it, no matter what. Doesn't matter.
Check. Jason, water clarity. Is that a consideration between either of these, or is that not even on the table here?
I don't know if I would consider it a major factor in either setup.
You can achieve it either way.
Yeah, worst case scenario, you might get some sand blowing around if your flow's too high, but as far as like overall water clarity, you can achieve that with either setup.
Okay. Will, is a bare bottom tank more advanced Are we going to label this as, in other words, you know, I started in the beginning saying, hey, if you're just getting into this, these are some considerations. But also, to be fair, because we want to make sure we set people up for success, should people considering a bare bottom tank also consider their level of reefing before getting into it?
I think yes. There's going to be some considerations that you need to look at when starting a bare bottom. Whereas with sand, most of the time, if you follow a guide, you can throw the sand in and just let it go. With a bare bottom, you're going to need to look at the flow and a few other aspects too.
Yeah, like we talked about, the cycle is going to be substantially longer.
Definitely.
So especially if it's your first tank, nobody really wants to go through that.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, last question in the rapid fire series. Can you achieve the same level of filtration and biological balance in a bare bottom tank without the live sand? And for me, I think the question, because we did talk about some of the balance, but filtration, right? How does that change between one or the other?
Right. Since you're losing out on a lot of the beneficial bacteria that live in the sand, adding them somewhere else is going to be a good solution to that. Adding something like ceramic biomedia to your refugium or to a reactor, if you have one, is going to replace what you're missing with the sand bed.
Yeah, or even if you have extra rock from your setup.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, that's the end of the rapid fire round, if you will. Hopefully we addressed some of the questions that you guys have out there on the on this topic. And again, as we continue to do these, we'll continue to bring in questions from the community, hopefully helping you make the right decisions for your setup along the way. And we'll see you on the next one.